and because I believe that helping you understand this quality about yourself could unlock possibilities that you haven't even considered yet. What I know about you that nobody else does is this. You have the ability to solve problems that seem impossible to everyone else, not because you're smarter or more talented than other people, but because you're willing to think about challenges in ways that bypass the mental limitations that stop most people before they even begin. I know this not from meeting you personally or learning about your background, but from the fact that you're here, listening to this conversation, which tells me something important about how your mind works and what motivates you to seek understanding rather than just accepting conventional explanations for why things are the way they are. Most people, when faced with problems that seem difficult or complex, immediately begin looking for reasons why those problems can't be solved, or why someone else should be responsible for solving them, or why the current situation, however unsatisfactory, is probably the best that can be achieved under the circumstances. But you're different. Something in your mental approach makes you curious about solutions rather than focused on obstacles, interested in possibilities rather than convinced of limitations, and willing to consider that problems exist because the right person hasn't applied the right approach yet, rather than because the problems are inherently unsolvable. This quality is rare, much rarer than intelligence or education or any of the other capabilities that people usually think determine success. Most people, including many who are brilliant and accomplished, have been trained by their experiences to see obstacles first and possibilities second. They look at challenges and immediately begin calculating why those challenges are too difficult, too expensive, too time-consuming, or too risky to address effectively. They've learned to protect themselves from disappointment by lowering their expectations rather than raising their problem-solving capabilities. But you've somehow preserved or developed a different approach. When you encounter problems, your first instinct is to wonder how they could be solved rather than why they can't be solved. You're naturally curious about what would be possible if the right combination of creativity, persistence, and resources were applied to challenges that others have written off as impossible. This doesn't mean you're naive about difficulties or blind to real constraints. It means you've learned to see constraints as factors to work with, rather than barriers that end all possibility of progress. Let me explain how I came to understand this quality and why I believe it's the most important predictor of whether someone will create something meaningful with their life, regardless of their current circumstances or background. The realization began when I started paying attention to the difference between people who accomplished extraordinary things and people who lived ordinary lives despite having similar intelligence, education, and opportunities. I discovered that the difference wasn't talent or luck or even hard work, though all of those factors mattered. The real difference was in how people approached problems when they first encountered them. Some people would see a challenge and immediately begin thinking about all the reasons it couldn't be addressed successfully. They would focus on everything that had been tried before and failed, everyone who had said it was impossible, all the obstacles that made success unlikely. Other people would see the same challenge and immediately begin wondering what approach hadn't been tried yet, what assumptions might be wrong, what combination of strategies might work where individual approaches had failed. Both groups were looking at the same problems, with access to the same information, facing the same objective difficulties, but their different mental approaches led to completely different outcomes. The first group would quickly convince themselves that the problems were too difficult for them to address, and they would either avoid the challenges entirely or approach them half-heartedly with expectations of failure that became self-fulfilling prophecies. The second group would become energized by the complexity of the challenges and would treat apparent impossibility as interesting puzzles to solve, rather than evidence that they should focus their attention on easier tasks. What I realized was that this second approach, curiosity about solutions, rather than preoccupation with obstacles, was the common factor among everyone I knew who had built something significant, whether in business, relationships, community work, or any other area where they had created value that wouldn't have existed without their efforts. But I also realized that this quality wasn't distributed randomly among people. It was something that could be developed and strengthened through practice, or that could be weakened and lost through experiences that taught people to expect failure rather than success when they attempted difficult things. Most importantly, I realized that many people who possessed this quality naturally didn't recognize it in themselves, and therefore weren't applying it systematically to the areas of their lives where it could make the biggest difference. This is what I know about you that nobody else does. You have this quality, but you probably don't fully understand how valuable it is or how to use it more effectively to address the challenges and opportunities in your own life. I know this because of the choices you've made that led you to this conversation. You could have spent this time on entertainment or distraction, or any of the countless activities that most people use to avoid thinking about difficult questions or complex problems. Instead, you chose to engage with ideas that require mental effort, that challenge conventional thinking, and that might change how you see your own capabilities and responsibilities. This choice reveals something important about your character and your approach to life that you might not fully recognize. You're someone who believes, at least unconsciously, that understanding leads to better outcomes than ignorance, that engagement with challenging ideas is more valuable than avoidance of complexity, and that investing mental energy in growth and learning will produce benefits that justify the effort required. These beliefs, whether you've articulated them consciously or not, indicate that you approach problems with the same curiosity about solutions that characterizes everyone who has ever created something meaningful. But what you might not understand is how to apply this natural tendency more systematically to the specific challenges in your own life, or how to strengthen this quality so that it becomes more powerful and more reliable when you need it most. Let me share a specific example of how this problem-solving approach works in practice, because I think seeing it applied to a real situation will help you understand how to use your own capabilities more effectively. 3 years ago, I met a woman named Jennifer who was facing what seemed like an impossible situation. She was a single mother with 2 young children, working a job that barely provided enough income to cover basic living expenses, with no savings, no family support, and no obvious path to improving her circumstances. Jennifer had been told by social workers, financial advisors, and well-meaning friends that her situation was simply difficult and that she should focus on getting by day to day rather than expecting dramatic improvements in her family's prospects. Most people in Jennifer's position would have accepted this assessment and focused on managing their limitations rather than looking for ways to transcend them. But Jennifer had the same quality I'm describing in you. When she looked at her situation, she saw problems to solve rather than circumstances to endure. Instead of asking, "How can I survive this?" she asked, "How can I create something better for my children?" Instead of focusing on what she lacked, she began looking for ways to use what she had, her time, her energy, her concern for her children's future, to address problems that she was uniquely positioned to solve. Jennifer noticed that many other single parents in her neighborhood were facing similar challenges with childcare, transportation, and the difficulty of managing work and family responsibilities without support systems. Instead of seeing this as evidence that her problems were common and therefore unsolvable, she saw it as an opportunity to create solutions that could help multiple families simultaneously. She started an informal childcare cooperative where parents took turns watching each other's children during work hours and emergencies. She organized carpools that reduced transportation costs for families who couldn't afford reliable vehicles. She created a skill-sharing network where parents with different capabilities helped each other with everything from home repairs to resume writing. None of these solutions required special education, significant startup money, or permission from institutions. They required Jennifer to see opportunities where others saw only problems, and to take responsibility for creating improvements rather than waiting for someone else to provide solutions. Within 2 years, Jennifer had not only solved her own childcare and transportation problems, but had become a community resource who was helping dozens of other families manage challenges that had previously seemed insurmountable. More importantly, she had created a small business, providing coordination services for working parents, that generated enough income to allow her to quit her minimum wage job and focus on work that was more fulfilling and more financially rewarding. But what made Jennifer's success possible wasn't unusual talent or exceptional luck. It was her willingness to approach her problems with curiosity about solutions rather than acceptance of limitations, and to take responsibility for creating improvements rather than waiting for external circumstances to change. This is exactly the same quality I see in you, and it's the reason I know that you're capable of addressing challenges in your own life that might seem impossible to other people, including people who know you well, but who don't understand how your mind works when you're facing problems that matter to you. Let me tell you about a moment when I first recognized this quality in someone, because it illustrates how powerful this way of thinking can be when it's applied with intention and persistence. I was speaking at a conference several years ago when a young woman approached me during the break. She was probably in her early 20s, dressed simply, and seemed nervous about interrupting my conversation with other attendees. When she finally got my attention, she said something that stopped me completely. "Mr. Musk," she said, "I've been listening to you talk about solving impossible problems, and I think I know how to fix something that everyone says can't be fixed. But nobody will listen to me because I don't have the right credentials." I was intrigued, so I asked her to explain. She told me about a persistent problem in her neighborhood where elderly residents were frequently falling and injuring themselves during winter months because the sidewalks became icy and dangerous, but the city said they didn't have the budget to clear them more frequently. Instead of accepting this as an unfortunate but unavoidable situation, she had spent weeks observing the problem and thinking about solutions. She had noticed that the falls happened most often in specific locations where water from building gutters created ice patches, and that the timing was predictable based on weather patterns. Her solution was elegantly simple: organize residents to apply a specific type of sand mixed with safe ice-melting compound to the most dangerous areas on a schedule that prevented ice formation rather than just reacting to it after it had already created hazards. She had calculated the cost, identified suppliers, created a schedule, and even designed a simple system for residents to contribute small amounts of money and volunteer time to maintain the program throughout winter months. What impressed me wasn't just the practicality of her solution, but the fact that she had approached a problem that everyone else had accepted as unsolvable with genuine curiosity about what might work, rather than resignation about what couldn't be changed. She saw the same icy sidewalks that everyone else saw, but instead of thinking, "This is dangerous and someone should do something about it," she thought, "This is a pattern that could be interrupted with the right intervention at the right time." That difference in perspective, seeing patterns that can be changed rather than problems that must be endured, is exactly what I recognize in you. The difference between using this quality effectively and letting it remain dormant is understanding how to apply it systematically rather than just occasionally when you happen to feel motivated or inspired. Most people who have this problem-solving approach use it sporadically, when they're facing crises, or when they stumble upon opportunities that capture their attention, but they don't use it consistently to address the ongoing challenges and opportunities in their daily lives. They might apply creative problem-solving to help a friend, or to address a crisis at work, but they accept limitations in their own relationships, health, finances, or personal development that could be addressed with the same approach they use for other people's problems. This is what I want to help you understand. The quality I see in you, the ability to find solutions that others miss, is not just for special occasions or dramatic situations. It's a way of approaching all of life's challenges that can transform everything about your daily experience and long-term outcomes. When you apply this approach systematically to your health, you stop accepting physical limitations or medical problems as permanent conditions and start looking for lifestyle changes, treatments, or approaches that could provide improvements that your doctors haven't suggested or don't believe are possible. When you apply it to your relationships, you stop accepting conflict, distance, or dissatisfaction as inevitable aspects of human connection and start looking for communication strategies, shared activities, or changes in approach that could create deeper intimacy and more supportive partnerships. When you apply it to your work and finances, you stop accepting your current income and career trajectory as fixed and start looking for ways to create more value, develop new skills, or find opportunities that align better with your interests and capabilities. Most importantly, when you apply this approach to your personal development, you stop accepting your current limitations as permanent aspects of your personality and start looking for ways to develop capabilities, overcome obstacles, and create changes that make you more effective and more satisfied with how you're living your life. The reason I know you have this quality is that you've already demonstrated it by making choices that led you to this conversation. You've shown that you're willing to invest time and mental energy in ideas that might change how you think about yourself and your possibilities. But what you might not realize is that this same willingness can be applied to every area of your life where you're currently accepting limitations that could be transcended with the right approach, persistence, and creativity. The difference between people who create extraordinary lives and people who live ordinary lives despite having extraordinary potential is not talent or opportunity. It's the systematic application of curiosity about solutions to all of life's challenges rather than just the ones that happen to capture their attention. You have this capability. What you need now is the understanding that it can be developed and applied more broadly than you might have realized, and the commitment to use it consistently rather than just when you feel particularly motivated. The problems in your life that seem most difficult or most permanent are probably the ones where this approach could make the biggest difference. The challenges you've been avoiding or accepting as unchangeable are likely the areas where your natural problem-solving ability could create the most significant improvements. What I know about you that nobody else does is that you don't have to accept your current limitations as permanent, your current problems as unsolvable, or your current circumstances as the best you can achieve. You have the ability to create solutions that others can't see, to find approaches that others haven't tried, and to make progress on challenges that others have given up on. The only question is whether you'll recognize this quality in yourself and begin using it more systematically to address the areas of your life where you most want to see change. Share this with you are about to give up on something that matters more than you realize, and giving up right now would be the biggest mistake of your life. I know this because I can see the signs that you probably can't see in yourself. You've been working towards something important, not necessarily a career goal or financial target, but something deeper that represents who you want to become and what you want your life to mean. But you've been facing obstacles that feel overwhelming, setbacks that seem to indicate you're not capable of achieving what you set out to do, and criticism or indifference from people who support you thought you could count on. You've started to question whether your goals were realistic, whether you have what it takes to succeed, whether the effort you've been putting in is worth the cost in time, energy, and emotional stress. Most dangerously, you've begun to rationalize giving up by telling yourself that your original aspirations were naive or grandiose, that adapting to more modest expectations is actually maturity rather than defeat. But you're wrong about all of this, and I need you to understand why before you make a decision that you'll regret for the rest of your life. The thing you're thinking about giving up on is not just a goal or a project or a dream. It's the part of you that believes you can create something meaningful, that refuses to accept limitations that other people take for granted, that sees possibilities where others see only obstacles. If you abandon this now, you won't just be changing your plans or adjusting your timeline. You'll be killing the most valuable part of your character, the part that makes you capable of contributions that no one else can make. I've been where you are right now. Multiple times, actually. There have been moments in building every company when continuing seemed impossible, when the rational choice appeared to be cutting losses and moving on to something more achievable. Tesla and SpaceX were close to bankruptcy. I had invested everything I had from previous successes, and I was facing the possibility of losing not just my companies, but my personal wealth and reputation. Friends and advisors urged me to focus on saving one company instead of trying to save both. The logical choice was to accept that I had overextended myself, to acknowledge that trying to revolutionize both the automotive and space industries simultaneously was more than one person could handle. But something inside me refused to accept that logic, not because I was confident about success, but because I understood that the work itself was more important than my personal comfort or financial security. I realized that if these companies failed because I gave up, rather than because the problems were genuinely unsolvable, I would never forgive myself. I would always wonder what might have been possible if I had found a way to persist through the difficulties. More importantly, I understood that the person I would become by giving up would be different from the person I would become by continuing to fight for something I believed in, regardless of the outcome. The choice wasn't really between success and failure. It was between becoming someone who abandoned his deepest commitments when they became difficult, or becoming someone who maintained his values and vision, even when doing so required sacrifice and uncertainty. That realization changed how I thought about the obstacles we were facing. Instead of seeing them as evidence that our goals were unrealistic, I began to see them as the price of attempting something meaningful, the resistance that proves you're working on something that matters. This is what I need you to understand about your current situation. The difficulties you're experiencing are not signs that you should give up. They're signs that you're working on something important enough to be difficult. Easy things don't change the world. Comfortable challenges don't develop the kind of character that enables extraordinary contributions. The resistance you're facing is not random bad luck, but the inevitable response of a world that resists change and innovation. Most people give up at exactly the moment when persistence would have made the difference between ordinary failure and extraordinary success. They interpret difficulty as evidence of impossibility rather than as evidence of significance. But you have the opportunity to be different. You can choose to see your current challenges as the cost of attempting something worthwhile, rather than as reasons to lower your expectations or abandon your goals. The specific thing you're considering giving up on might seem like just one project or goal among many possible alternatives, but it's not. It's the manifestation of your belief that you can create something valuable, that your efforts can make a difference, that the world can be improved through persistence and innovation. If you abandon this belief now, you'll find it much harder to access it again in the future. You'll have taught yourself that when things become genuinely difficult, retreat is the reasonable response. But if you persist through this challenge, you'll prove to yourself that you're capable of continuing when continuation seems impossible. You'll develop the kind of resilience and determination that makes future challenges more manageable rather than more intimidating. This isn't about blind optimism or refusing to acknowledge real limitations. It's about understanding the difference between obstacles that require new strategies and obstacles that require abandoning worthy goals. Most of the barriers you're facing are solvable if you're willing to approach them creatively and persistently. The question is not whether solutions exist, but whether you'll continue working to find them when the work becomes uncomfortable or uncertain. I'm telling you this because I can see something in your situation that you might not be able to see. You're closer to breakthrough than you realize. The progress you've made, the skills you've developed, the understanding you've gained, these represent investments that will be lost if you give up now, but that will compound rapidly if you continue. The next 6 months of your life will determine whether you become someone who perseveres through significant challenges or someone who retreats when persistence becomes difficult. The choice you make will influence not just this particular goal, but your approach to every future challenge that requires sustained effort and courage. Your children, if you have them or plan to have them, will learn more from watching how you handle the situation than from anything you might teach them directly about persistence, courage, and the importance of not giving up on things that matter. The people who believe in you are counting on you to prove that the faith they've invested in your potential was justified. But more importantly, the part of yourself that set these goals originally deserves the chance to see what you're actually capable of achieving when you refuse to accept defeat. That realization changed how I thought about the obstacles we were facing. Instead of seeing them as evidence that our goals were unrealistic, I began to see them as the price of attempting something meaningful, the resistance that proves you're working on something that matters. But let me tell you about the specific moment when I almost gave up completely, because I think you're in a similar place right now and you need to understand what that moment taught me about the difference between temporary defeat and permanent failure. It was the 23rd of December, 2008. I was sitting alone in my office at SpaceX at 11 p.m., staring at a computer screen showing our bank account balance. We had enough money to operate for maybe 6 more weeks. 3 rocket launches had failed, each one taking millions of dollars and months of work with it. The media was calling me a dilettante who was wasting money on fantasy projects, Engineers were leaving to work for companies that could actually pay their salaries reliably. My own board members were suggesting it was time to cut our losses and focus on more achievable goals. But the worst part wasn't the financial pressure or the public criticism. The worst part was the voice in my own head that had started saying, maybe they're right. Maybe you've been fooling yourself about what's possible. Maybe the smart thing to do is admit this isn't working and move on to something more realistic. I had reached the point that I think you're at right now, the point where continuing feels like stubborn denial of obvious reality, where everyone around you seems wiser and more practical than you are, where your original vision starts to feel naive and embarrassing. That night, I found myself writing an email to our team announcing that we would be scaling back operations and looking for buyers for our assets. I actually typed out most of the message, explaining that we had learned valuable lessons, but that market conditions and technical challenges had proven too difficult to overcome. But before I sent that email, I did something that changed everything. I printed out the original mission statement I had written for SpaceX 5 years earlier, the document that explained why I believed making life multiplanetary was essential for humanity's long-term survival. Reading those words again, I remembered the clarity and conviction I had felt when I wrote them. The problems we were trying to solve hadn't become less important because our rockets kept exploding. The need for backup plans for human civilization hadn't disappeared because we were running out of money. What had changed wasn't the mission, but my confidence in my ability to accomplish it. I had let temporary setbacks convince me that permanent goals were unrealistic. As I sat there holding that mission statement, I realized that giving up wasn't really about accepting practical limitations. It was about choosing who I wanted to be, someone who abandoned his deepest commitments when they became difficult, or someone who continued working on what he believed was important regardless of how hard it became. I deleted the email announcing our shutdown. Instead, I spent the next 4 hours writing a different message to our team, explaining why I believed we were going to continue, why our failures were teaching us what we needed to know, and why our next attempt was going to succeed because of everything we had learned from our previous attempts. I sent that email at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve, and I went home knowing that I had chosen to bet everything on my belief that the work itself was more important than my personal comfort or reputation. 3 months later, our fourth rocket launch succeeded. Within 2 years, we had secured NASA contracts that not only saved the company, but validated everything we had been working toward. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the knowledge that I had learned to persist through the kind of doubt and difficulty that stops most people from achieving anything extraordinary. This is what I need you to understand about your current situation. You are in the 23rd of December moment right now. You are facing the choice between the person you become by giving up and the person you become by continuing, regardless of how impossible continuation seems. The voice telling you to be realistic and practical isn't wisdom, it's fear disguised as rationality. The people suggesting you should lower your expectations or try something easier aren't necessarily wrong about the difficulties you're facing, but they're wrong about what those difficulties mean. Difficulty is not evidence of impossibility. It's evidence that you're working on something that matters enough to be difficult. Easy problems have already been solved by someone else. The hard problems are where you have the opportunity to make contributions that no one else can make. Right now, you're probably surrounded by people who think your goals are unrealistic, who point to your setbacks as evidence that you should adjust your expectations, who suggest that persistence in the face of repeated failure is just stubborn denial of reality. But those people have never accomplished anything extraordinary themselves. They don't understand that breakthrough achievements always look impossible right up until they become inevitable. They mistake the resistance that precedes every significant accomplishment for evidence that the accomplishment is impossible. The truth is that you are probably much closer to success than anyone around you realizes, including yourself. The skills you've developed, the knowledge you've gained, the network you've built, the understanding you've acquired through your failures. All of these represent investments that compound rapidly once you achieve momentum. Most people give up just before the compound returns from their investments start to become visible. They interpret the long period of effort without obvious results as evidence that their approach isn't working, when actually it's evidence that they're approaching the point where their efforts will start producing exponential rather than linear returns. This is what I need you to do. For the next 30 days, commit to continuing as if giving up were not an option. Don't focus on the ultimate outcome or try to predict whether you'll eventually succeed. Just focus on doing the work, solving the immediate problems, and maintaining forward momentum regardless of how you feel about your prospects. During those 30 days, you'll likely discover resources, solutions, and capabilities that you didn't know you had. You'll find that many of the obstacles that seemed insurmountable become manageable when you stop using energy to debate whether to continue and start using that energy to figure out how to continue. Most importantly, you'll remember why you started this work in the first place, and you'll reconnect with the vision that motivated you before setbacks and criticism made you question your judgment and abilities. After 30 days of committed effort without the option of retreat, you'll be in a much better position to evaluate your situation objectively and make decisions based on actual evidence rather than fear, frustration, or the opinions of people who don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. But I believe that if you give yourself those 30 days of total commitment, you won't want to give up anymore. You'll have rediscovered the satisfaction that comes from working on something important, and you'll have rebuilt the confidence that setbacks had eroded. The message I have for you is this: you are capable of more than you currently believe. The work you're doing matters more than current evidence suggests, and giving up now would deprive the world of contributions that only you can make. Don't let temporary difficulties convince you to abandon permanent possibilities. Don't let the opinions of people who have never attempted anything similar influence your commitment to goals that represent your deepest values and highest aspirations. You started this work because you believed it was important. That belief was correct then, and it's correct now. The only thing that has changed is that you've encountered the resistance that always accompanies meaningful work. Push through the resistance. Trust your original vision. Give yourself the chance to discover what becomes possible when you refuse to accept defeat. The world needs what you're working on, even if the world doesn't recognize that need yet. But more than that, you need to complete this work to become the person you're capable of being. Don't give up. Not now. Not when you're so close to proving to yourself and others what persistence makes possible. Share this message with someone who might be on the verge of giving up on something important. But remember, this message was written specifically for you, because you are the one who needs to hear it most. Subscribe if these conversations help you find the strength to continue when continuation seems impossible. And remember, the greatest achievements in human history have come from people who refused to give up precisely when giving up seemed most reasonable. Every person who has ever changed the world has faced a moment exactly like the one you're facing now, a moment when persistence seemed foolish, when the evidence suggested retreat, when everyone